Well, crap. I thought I was done buying cars for a while, and then this Volkswagen Scirocco 16 valve goes up for sale, and now I own it. Whoops. I had one of these back when I was 18, and to this day, it goes down as the worst, most unreliable piece of crap car I've ever owned. And because I'm an automotive masochist, I decided to buy a nearly identical Scirocco to the one that I used to own. And hopefully, it doesn't ruin my life as much as that first one did. I thought I was getting control of the whole buying too many cars thing, and then this thing just had to go up for sale, so I picked it up yesterday. And way back when I was 18, I had a nearly identical Scirocco 16 valve, same color and everything. Here's a picture of me loading up everything that I own into the back of one when I was getting ready to move across the country from Massachusetts to California. Here's another one from Badlands National Park. There are a lot of memories wrapped up into that Scirocco that I used to own. Some very good memories and some terrible ones that I wish I could forget. It really was a terrible, completely unreliable car. But in retrospect, I suppose it was also a great car because it was so unreliable and had so many problems. It provided me with a lot of really good stories to tell. And clearly, nostalgia was a huge factor in buying one of these again. Not only because it's a car that you rarely see anymore, heck, I rarely saw them back in the day, but because I wanted to give the Scirocco another chance several decades later and see if I could erase some of those bad memories that I had with the first one. The Scirocco began its life in the 70s as a Giugiaro-designed coupe to replace the Carmen Ghia. The second gen had an in-house design and came to the US as an 82 model. And from mid-86 to 1988, we got the sportier 16-valve model, complete with a 16-valve 1.8-liter engine, a body kit, larger spoiler, and teardrop wheels. And that's what we have here. This is a 1988, the last year of the 16-valve for the US. And this exterior design is one of the major things that drew me to this car initially. It's a very unique and somewhat odd design, and I love it. Nice curves out back that lead to a completely squared off front end. And a lot of people don't like these US spec bumpers, but I love them. It brings me back to the Sciroccos that I used to see as a kid. I mean, yeah, these are really some gigantic bumpers that we have on this thing, especially in the back. Look at this massive chunky bumper. A lot of people like to swap these out with the Euro spec bumpers, but I'm not gonna do that. I actually really like these. Yeah, and just look how squared off the front of this car is. It's so 80s, I love it. Really huge fan of these teardrop wheels. And one thing that I noticed recently that I didn't realize when I was younger is that these are not directional. You think that this little swoosh right there should flow towards the back of the car on both sides, but if you go to the other side of the car, nope, not directional. Still pretty cool though. And this sort of squishy spoiler reminds me a lot of my 944 Turbo that I had. These antennas were a staple on Volkswagens from the 80s. I always thought these were so cool. Another really 80s touch right here are these taillights with these black stripes that go across. It sort of reminds me of something Pontiac would do. I love these wheel arches here as part of this body kit, but definitely that's an area where rust could form underneath those plastic bits. Thankfully, this car does not have any rust. But yeah, overall, this is an extremely clean example of an 88 Scirocco 16 valve. I haven't seen one this clean in a very long time. Even the one that I owned back in the day didn't look as nice as this one does. Now, the details of this car's history are a bit fuzzy. The original owner owned it for decades, and apparently it sat for a very long time after some sort of issue. It only shows about 30,000 miles on the odometer, which it's really hard to tell if that's true or not. Judging from the looks of the car and the condition of the interior, I would believe that that's true. But the guy that I bought it from said that the original owner couldn't really remember all of the details, so I don't really know if it has 30,000 miles. I guess it probably has a little bit more than that. But now that this Scirocco is part of the Hello Road fleet, it is by far the nicest vehicle that I own. All right, there's that beautiful 16 valve engine. The guy that I bought it from did a bunch of freshening up in here. A lot of new parts. The thing runs great. So what we have right here is a 1.8 liter fuel injected 16 valve 4-cylinder, and that delivered 123 horsepower. And that doesn't sound like a lot by today's standards, but you have to remember that this vehicle only weighs like 22 to 2,300 pounds. All right, so staring at that engine brought back some memories. Quick time machine back to when I was 18. I used to drive by this tiny car dealership every day on my way to work when I was delivering pizzas. And one day, a bright red, boxy Scirocco 16 valve appeared in their lot, and I had read a lot about them in car magazines and loved the design and thought about how cool I would feel if I replaced my aging Toyota Tercel with a sporty red Volkswagen. So I saved up a bunch of money and I borrowed some cash from my grandma and I bought it. It was a really momentous occasion for me, a really big deal. All right, so here's where the story takes a little bit of a turn. The very next day when I was delivering pizza in my Scirocco, the timing belt snaps, and because this is an interference engine, the valves in the engine get bent very badly. Yeah, the day after I bought it, engine go boom. Wonderful. So the car gets towed back to the dealer. It sits at their shop for like 3 months. As it turns out, that dealer was kind of shady. I kind of felt like an idiot for buying a car from that shyster. So I call the shop every few weeks and they haven't done anything. Eventually, I get the car back and it runs like hot garbage. They didn't do the job right and they refused to work on it anymore. So I brought the car to another shop and they quoted me like $3 grand, which is like $5 grand in today's dollars, to fix it properly. So after about a year of back and forth, I took the original dealer to small claims court. I win and I was awarded triple damages, but the dealer ended up closing, the owner skipped town, and I could never collect the money, which sucked. So now I had a busted Scirocco and needed to spend like $3 grand to get the thing fixed up. And that's not great when you're in community college and you're living on a pizza delivery job wage, but I saved my pennies and I got the thing fixed. And honestly, that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the bad luck that I had with that Scirocco. But let's pause on that for a bit. Thankfully, the timing belt in this Scirocco was done very recently. So let's take a pause and go take a look at the interior and see what we've got inside. All right, so here we are in my 1988 Volkswagen Scirocco 16 valve. Now, if you've never sat in one of these before, even if you covered up the Volkswagen emblem on the steering wheel, you'd absolutely know that you're sitting in an 80s Volkswagen. This steering wheel right here with the 4 horn buttons was shared among countless other Volkswagen products in the 80s. Same with the gauge cluster. It wasn't exactly modern by 1988 standards, but everything's functional, everything works really well in here. And it just feels familiar because so many Volkswagens used a lot of these parts. And sitting in one of these things for the first time in several decades, some things strike me as very familiar. The smell is identical to the smell in my Volkswagen Scirocco so many years ago. It's kind of weird how that works. The outgassing of whatever plastics they've got in here, the smell hasn't changed. No rips in these seats. These seats look brand new. It's pretty ridiculous. Door panels look brand new. Doesn't look like anybody's ever sat in the back seat. Couple imperfections in the headliner. And yeah, there's some cracks in the dashboard, but I don't think I've seen a Scirocco without cracks in the dashboard. It's in really, really great shape. And like I said before, this is like the nicest vehicle that I own now. And I actually fit in here, which is kind of surprising. It's a very small car. I don't want to sit in the back seat though. That doesn't look like a whole lot of fun. I will say that it's a bit tighter in this area than I remember. The steering wheel's a lot bigger than I remember. But yeah, original Volkswagen stereo with a cassette player, everything works here. I always like these stupid, simple HVAC controls that they used to have back in the day, as opposed to all those screen-based systems, which I loathe. Now, my old Scirocco had some fun interior problems, like the window motors would fail, had a sunroof and that leaked a lot. Big pools of musty water would fill the floorboards and the driver's seat. I always had to have a towel in the car. Not a lot of fun. Yeah, those were all things that could be fixed, but over time, more and more things just kept breaking and I didn't have the funds to keep up with everything. And thankfully here, we've just got manual crank windows and no sunroof. Hallelujah. But yeah, it's really nice to be experiencing this interior again. So many little details that I remember loving so many years ago. It brings back so many memories driving this thing. The first one being that, oh yeah, this thing is loud. I remember the Scirocco's being very loud, and this one is quite loud too. I like this thing. I remember why I bought the original one way back then. It's got 123 horsepower, which doesn't seem like a lot today, but it's lightweight, it handles really well. The engine is just great. I love this engine. But it is funny though, it definitely takes you back to the 80s. There's a lot of rattles. The engine is pretty harsh. It kind of sounds like a quad 4 GM engine from the 80s, but because this thing is so lightweight, it's a lot of fun to drive. It is kind of funny though, it's a little bit slower than I remember. You know, my perspective of speed has changed a whole lot in the last couple decades. This probably felt like a rocket ship when I was 18, but now it just feels somewhat fast. The shifter is a bit more rubbery than I remember too, but it still shifts pretty nice. And the funny thing about driving this car is just how many stares you get and how many people are like, you know, because they haven't seen one of these in like forever. Yeah, I kind of really like this thing. So we do have to go back to my old Scirocco here for a second. For some reason, I thought it would be a good idea to drive it 3,000 miles across the US, knowing in the back of my head that it would probably give me some trouble because I already had that issue with the timing belt, and yeah, I wasn't like super confident in the car's capabilities, but I did it anyway. One thing that was kind of nice, it actually made it all the way to California without too many issues. So I do have to give it credit for that. And aside from it forming a lake inside the cabin every single time that it rained, it didn't break down on me while I was in California. So it's when I decided to drive back east, back home to Massachusetts, where the major problem started. So I got stranded in New Mexico because both the fuel pump and the distributor decided to kick the bucket on the same day, and I didn't have enough money to fix it. So in order to get home, yep, I called my mom. I figured my dad would be too disappointed in me, but my mom let me borrow some funds. So after a couple days, I got back on the road, and then the transmission kept popping out of fifth gear, which is great, and the transmission mounts seemed to be going, and the axles were starting to make noise, and the dashboard lights started illuminating. It was not looking good. And all of that was happening 2,000 miles away from home. So I couldn't borrow any more money, so I just had to power through and hope that the car would make it. I found a piece of rope on the side of the road, and I set up this system where once I got it into fifth gear, I'd attach the rope from the gear selector over to the glove box, and then it would hold it in fifth gear without popping out. So as those miles started to pile on, the rope trick stopped working, and now it started popping out of fourth gear. So for basically like 1,000 miles, I was stuck in third gear with the engine racing down the freeway, and I just wanted to get that heap of parts home. The axles started sounding worse, the transmission mounts were on their last legs. I slept in the car at rest stops and just powered through on that trip, and eventually I made it home. So I do have to give the car some credit, it did make it, but by the time I was home, it was barely a car, it was more like a pile of German parts held together with a prayer and a piece of roadside rope. So not long after that, I sold the car, took a huge loss, and vowed never to buy another Volkswagen ever again. Fast forward to today, and here I am with a nearly identical Scirocco to the one that gave me more problems than any other vehicle that I've ever owned. Why would I do this to myself? Am I mad? Well, yes, I'd say that there is a touch of automotive masochism going on here, but a lot of this just comes down to pure, good old-fashioned nostalgia. Even though I had so many rough times with that old Scirocco, thinking about those memories brings me back to a simpler time, a time that I kind of miss. And don't get me wrong, I'm fully aware that nostalgia is just an illusion, and buying an identical car to the one that I had when I was a kid isn't going to magically bring me back in time. In fact, it's probably just gonna make me a bit sad. But the main thing here is that I wanted to give the Scirocco a second chance, a chance of making some new memories, some memories that I'll remember when I'm old and gray, and hopefully just not as much breaking down, but even if it does, I'll probably be fine with it. At least now I'm doing a little bit better financially than I was when I was delivering pizzas. And I guess after driving this Scirocco for a while, I've realized that these aren't bad cars. I think I just had a whole lot of bad luck with my previous Scirocco. Apparently I didn't buy a very good example, and I definitely bought it from the wrong guy. But then again, I've only had this new one for a couple days, so anything could happen. So should I have bought this thing? Like most vehicles that I've owned, probably not, but I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of new memories I can create with this cute little boxy red car. What do you think? Was this Scirocco 16 valve a good addition to my collection of misfit vehicles, or a terrible mistake? Let me know in the comments below. All right, that's it for today. If you like this video and you want to see more like it, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon. If you want to help support the channel, please buy a Hello Road t-shirt or hat at helloroad.tv/shop. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you're well, and I'll see you soon.
Willing, agile, and power-packed. This new 16-valve Scirocco is special. Inside, outside, and especially here under the hood.